Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Well, Craig, not much time has passed since our last tribute episode. As most of our longtime listeners know, every time a famous person passes on, we furiously run to IMDb and look up which horror movies they might have happened to have been in or involved with. And last month, Angela Lansbury passed away. The Dame Angela Bridget Lansbury, who was almost 100 years old when she died. An absolute icon of the stage and silver screen and TV screen. I remember her from Murder, She Wrote in the 80s, which was a fantastic series where she played a woman who was a mystery writer and goes out and solves mysteries. That was such a great series. It lasted a really long time, I think from the early 80s until like the mid-90s. She was in lots of movies, kids' movies. She's actually, when you read the Wikipedia page, it mentions that she's one of the last surviving persons of the golden age of Hollywood. I mean, she was born in 1925, and she got started in the 1940s, I believe. She was in Gaslight. National Velvet. I mean, the Manchurian Candidate. The list goes on. This woman, I cannot believe that she has stayed acting as long as she has and been as successful as she has, just consistently over the years. And as far as I know, ne'er a controversy or anything, just this sweet woman who had this wonderful career. So it's really kind of sad to hear that she's gone now.
I agree. I mean, what do you say? I think that Angela Lansbury is just one of those few celebrities who's kind of universally loved. I mean, I can't think of anything that anybody would have to say that would be negative about her. Yeah, you're right. You know, she was born in London to prominent parents. Her mother was an actress. Her father was a politician. Upper middle class. British, but she also spent time in Ireland, and she was also she became an American citizen as well and spent a lot of time here. So I imagine that, like many international performers, she was able to adapt her accent as necessary. And yeah, I mean, her parents moved to the United States. I believe they started out in New York, but pretty quickly transferred to Los Angeles. And she started auditioning at 16, lying, saying that she was 19 years old, and started working immediately. I think that she got nominated for an Academy Award for her first role for Best Supporting Actress, and received many, many, many accolades. She was nominated for several Academy Awards. She won some Golden Globe Awards, several Tonys, I think, and many others. And rightfully so. She was a great actress. Of course, most people, I think, our age and younger, remember her as Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast. That was one of her biggest popular roles and what she's widely remembered for. I didn't watch Murder, She Wrote. I was very much aware of it, but my parents didn't watch it, so I didn't watch it. But I knew her when I was a kid from Bedknobs and Broomsticks. I loved that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Very much akin to Mary Poppins, less popular, but just as fun. She also famous for her theater work. She did Gypsy. She originated the role of Mame, I think. Sweeney Todd, she was famous for. And that her Broadway production of that was actually filmed and is available, you know, if you want to see that. In fact, I almost wondered if we should have done that because
I thought about it.
When she passed away, I thought, oh man, that's really sad. And of course, you know, like you said, anytime anybody, not necessarily every celebrity, otherwise every episode would have to be a tribute episode, but people who touched us personally, yes, in some way. And she certainly did. She's been a big part of my childhood, and she's been just one of those people who's been a constant throughout my life. You know, she pops up. Her last film, I think, is still in theaters now.
Yeah.
It's in the Knives Out sequel. So she's always been there. And so, you know, for her to pass is kind of a big deal. And I thought, you know, it would be nice to pay tribute to her, but I thought surely she never did a horror movie.
Right? Now,
But
come
she
on,
did.
we know better. I mean, there's always that's always the thing. Surely this person didn't do a horror movie, and then it always turns out that this actor had some low point in their career, or was doing some favor to somebody, or for whatever reason ended up in this off the wall, way out of left field horror movie that nobody saw that got bad reviews, and we end up doing these terrible movie reviews basically for a lot of these prominent, respectable actors, right? That
Yeah.
we pay tribute to.
I can't imagine why she did this movie, but she was first choice and she was asked to do it and she did. The only thing that I know is that she was a huge fan of cinema and television, and she had diverse tastes.
Yeah.
So maybe, she's just one of those people who is kind of up for anything.
Oh yeah.
And it's a fitting role for her, but it's a weird movie.
Oh, it is. The movie we're talking about is called The Company of Wolves from 1984. It is listed as a British Gothic fantasy horror film. And I saw this. Didn't you? I used to see this in the horror section all the time. Because
The box art is incredibly familiar.
Oh, and it's extremely captivating. It's this girl, and then there's this. It's like the woods, but there's right in the front, right in your face, is this man who's in the midst of transforming into a werewolf. And the way it's happening is, like, basically his mouth is wide open, and the wolf's maw is coming out of its mouth, like this wolf is literally bursting out of this guy's skin. It's really compelling. I don't know why I never picked it up, to be honest, because I was super interested in it. So when I saw that she was in this movie, number one, I was like, really? And number two, I was, oh my gosh, she's listed number one on the credits as a supposed title role here. And this is a movie I've been wanting to see for so long. So I know we could have done Sweeney Todd, and she's got a more prominent role in Sweeney Todd, but it's like a stage musical. It's like a recording of a stage musical. So I thought, this would be better. So yeah, I was a little selfish when I proposed to Craig, and Craig never turns down anything I propose. He might regret it later, but he never turns down anything I propose. So bless you for letting us do The Company of Wolves. This movie was not at all what I had expected. Not in the slightest, and I say that in a good way. Gosh, I've been. Well, this is the kind of movie that I watch, and I'm really, really glad that you're an English teacher. And you spend your day going through textual criticism and unpacking layers of meaning and symbolism in texts with kids, because I feel like your skills are going to come in handy with this one. Because this movie, it's heady.
Yeah,
it's way headier than I thought it would be. It's much more literary than I thought it would be. It's based on a short story from a novelist named Angela Carter, who was a well-acclaimed feminist writer who wrote a book that's basically a compilation. It's called The Bloody Chamber, but it seems like it's a compilation of more or less werewolf stories.
Yeah.
It more or less unpacks the story of Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
Honestly, when you listen to fairy tales as a kid, you never think of subtext, right? You never think, where did this come from? What is this really saying? Is there anything more to this than just a cute story or some little morality tale? Hey, little girl, be careful when you walk through the woods, kind of thing. But there is, and there always has been, deep layers of subtext in this and most fairy tales and old folk legends that pass by over time and get interpreted and reinterpreted. But at the core, when you think about Little Red Riding Hood, it's about danger of men to girls. Men can be wolves, and this girl is walking through the woods, i.e., she's going through life. She has a red hood, which can symbolize her blood, menstrual cycle, things like that. She might be coming to adolescence, and here you are when you're an adolescent suddenly becoming attractive to men, and men start approaching you, and not all of them have the best of intentions.
Right.
So this is a story that really dives deep into that, but it's not straightforward at all. It's not straightforward in its narrative structure. It's not even straightforward in its story, but I was glued to the screen. But also I was just scratching my head through a lot of it, thinking, "Oh God, we're gonna have to analyze this."
I guess I don't know. I did not know what to make of it. It's bizarre. First of all, Little Red Riding Hood on the surface is very clearly about stranger danger.
Yeah.
Teaching kids, don't talk to strangers. Okay, very simple. But as you suggested, it's not difficult to scratch just below that and find sexuality at play. And this movie explores that a lot. It really leans heavy into that element of it. So the movie starts out in real life. It's
perhaps.
weird. Yeah, it still feels period, but I'm not sure exactly what period it's meant to be.
It really runs that line, doesn't it? I mean, from the first few scenes, which there are no people in, it's the woods that comes onto this old-looking, like, well in the woods. There's a dog that pops in and sniffs around the well, and you can see that there's a doll that's very old-looking doll that's been maybe stuck for centuries in the brush there by it, and he runs out. And I'm immediately, I don't know why, but I'm immediately thinking this is a period piece.
Right.
Just the tone and look of it. And when the dog runs out of the woods to a street and a sedan comes driving down the road, I was really jarred. My mind couldn't adjust, because even when the sedan pulls into the house it's going to, it's this countryside mansion, this little British countryside mansion and manor, and this girl comes running out in these flowy white lacy kind of dress, right? There's so many little things about the house and what they're wearing and the setting that bounce you back and forth, and it's hard to resolve in my head, and I have to believe that was intentional.
Yeah, I imagine so. And this girl greets it's her parents arriving in a car. I don't know where they've been on holiday or something, and they're like, where is she? And I didn't know who. I thought they were probably talking about the grandmother, because I knew there was going to be a grandmother.
Right.
But they weren't. I guess the girl that we've seen thus far is the older sister, Alice, and she goes upstairs and is kind of snotty and tormenting her younger sister, Rosaleen, who is asleep in her bed. It seems like she's disturbed in her sleep. And that's this frame story, is that she's dreaming, and she dreams. The very first thing that she dreams is that her sister is dead. They're at her sister's funeral. Well, I guess we see her sister running through the forest. That's the first thing we see. Well, and it's not just any forest. Almost all of it is set in these woods and in this village in the woods. And apparently it's right outside of Rosaleen's window. Like, she can see the area where it is outside of her window.
The camera kind of pans out the window. It pans across her room and shows all of her toys first. And then it pans out the window, yeah.
And then when the sister is being chased through these woods, they're clearly fantasy woods. There's like large oversized toadstools, and the toys from Rosaleen's room are there, but they're like life-size, person-size. And they move and like walk around and chase Alice. And eventually Alice is pursued by a whole pack of wolves. There's tons of wolves in this movie. Actually, that's not really true. There are only 2 wolves in this movie. The rest are dogs.
Painted to look like wolves. But we don't know.
Well, I mean, it's close enough.
Yeah.
It's close enough.
Right.
I guess, I mean, you don't see it. You just see the wolves surround her and she screams. But then the next thing is at her outdoor countryside funeral, and she's just in a pine box that they nail shut. And all of a sudden, we're in this fantasy fairy tale world where we spend most of the time. But it keeps cutting back to Rosaleen asleep and like crying or moaning or thrashing in her sleep while all of these events are going on.
Yeah.
Now, I read that they filmed all of the main story, and then they decided that they wanted to do this frame thing that was in real life. And I don't really get why. I don't get it.
Here's what I think. I think it's kind of a way to show that this is a timeless tale, that it's as relevant to modern day, at least the themes and things, as it is to the past. And so even though it's a dream that this girl is having, and also there's a little bit of ambiguity, right? Because she's dreaming, but it has already been established that these places actually exist. And she plays the Little Red Riding Hood. She plays herself in her own dream.
Right, and her parents are her parents.
Yeah, her parents are there, and they're just now in this village just outside of the house where she's in. And later in the dream world, there's stories within stories, by the way,
Right.
in this narrative. And one of the stories surrounds an upper crust British party, and that's taking place in the lawn outside of the home where she's in right now.
Yeah.
So there's this strong sense of history. There's a strong sense of hereditary progression, ancestry, this kind of thing. But it's so confusing, right? Because you're waiting for an explanation for all of this. Like, is she a descendant of these people?
Right.
Was there some time warp, or what's going on? And you never get it. You never get it. It's very thematic. The director, Neil Jordan, has done, he won an Academy Award for writing, but he also directed The Crying Game. That was a huge movie in 92. He's done a lot of well-regarded movies, I should say. They're not all big.
Interview with the Vampire was the biggest one I was familiar with.
Yeah. He's a pretty good director. And I have to say, I was impressed by the directing and the set design. Really, a lot of the production of this movie I was really impressed with. Now, he collaborated, by the way, with Angela Carter on this.
Yeah, and they had a really good relationship, I guess. That's the thing. The source material, like you said, was just a collection of short stories. But then that collection of short stories was adapted into a radio production. And I think that it was in that radio production that they kind of structured it so that it was stories within stories, so that there was one big larger narrative, but then within that larger narrative, some of the smaller stories are told. And that makes sense, and that's really what they based the film on, was the radio production more so than just the original book.
Yeah, that's true, but I think Jordan also was inspired by a movie called The Sargosa Manuscript, which is a Polish film from 1965 that did this also, that had story within story, kind of what he called like a Chinese puzzle box of structure.
Yeah.
Not only did he cite that as a inspiration, but also Roger Corman.
Right.
Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe series as inspiration for this film as well, so I thought that was kind of interesting. I wouldn't have seen that, but now that he mentions it, I do see it.
Yes.
Because those were all period pieces, too.
And then at the end, it's like the worlds collide.
Yeah.
Like the fantasy world and her real world collide, but it's a little bit anticlimactic. I mean, it looks good. What they do at the end, it looks good, but ultimately, I just felt like the frame narrative was unnecessary. I don't know. Anyway, it's fine. I just didn't think that it was necessary because the rest of it feels like a reimagining of a classic fairy tale, just a little bit darker and for a little bit more of a mature audience.
Yeah.
But it does feel very much like a fairy tale because it doesn't feel like the real world.
Oh, at all.
It's filmed on sets, which are very clearly sets. The costumes are very clearly costumes.
Now, wait a minute, though. When you say they're very clearly sets, you're not saying that the sets look bad, right?
No.
Like, they look fake. They just look so unreal. There's no way these could be anything but sets, is what you're saying.
Right. And it almost looks like, not almost, it very much looks like a stage production.
Really?
I think so, with set pieces. I mean, the set pieces to me look like stage set pieces. They don't. I mean, it's good. I think that's what they're going for. I don't think they're going for a realistic look.
No,
I think that they are
absolutely
going
not.
for a fantasy.
Yeah.
And it looks like that. And I'm not saying it in a bad way. I'm not offering this as a criticism.
Right.
It's just, this is a fantasy world. This does not look like the real world. It looks like a forest and a fairy tale. It is dark. It is scary. There's all kinds of... At one point, I'm like, what is with all these f***ing frogs? Like, I don't understand. There are so many frogs. What? I don't get it.
I'll tell you a bit. See, I've been thinking a lot about this movie. I don't have the definitive answer about the frogs, but I have an idea about the frogs. Because frogs they're another sort of fairy tale thing, like a lot of animals are, right? The spider and the fly and the lion and the mouse and whatever. But, like, frogs are the thing you kiss for your prince.
Sure.
Right? They're sometimes seen as men in disguise, and all the girl has to do is kiss it, and this ugly, ugly frog turns into a beautiful prince. It's sort of the opposite of the wolf, this seductive, man who's really, really nice. Once you interact with him, suddenly turns out to be this horrible monster, that wants to kill you. And I thought that the frogs seem to really reference a lot grandma. Like, grandma had frogs, little frog statues and things in her house. And I might be reading too much into it, but I thought that perhaps that was a little nod to, or perhaps like the men she's had in her life, or that, her husband long passed or something like that. I don't know. That's what I thought anyway.
Well, I mean, I don't think you're wrong to read something into it. I always tell my students when we're studying literature, I say, if a writer keeps bringing something up over and over again, if an image keeps getting presented to you over and over again, there's a reason for it. They don't just do this for no reason.
Right.
And so I have to kind of think the same thing here. There's got to be something. I don't know if I get it, but for the number of times we see frogs, which is a lot, there's got to be something to it. And of course I thought that too, like the prince in disguise or whatever. There's also a giant snake, a python or something that it gets lots of screen time just hanging out in the forest.
Yeah.
And usually people just walk right by it and don't even notice that they're like within inches of it, inches from their face. And, of course, then there's all kinds of connotations with snakes, with the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent. And then snakes also have kind of a sexual, phallic kind of connotation thing too. And the movie, much of it is about sexuality, so I don't know. But it's strange. It's interesting. It is interesting to present a well-known fairy tale, which, by the way, it takes a while to get to.
Yeah.
It's set up from the beginning. You know that you're dealing with Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, and the grandmother lives out in the forest, and you have to stay on the path to get to grandmother's house, and that's, repeated over and over again how important it is and how dangerous it is to stray from the path. And so that's what you're dealing with, but it takes a long time to get there, to get to the actual story that we are familiar with of Little Red Riding Hood. You get there, but not until the very end of the movie. And the rest of it is kind of several other stories about werewolves just in the context of Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
As though, like the story that we know of Little Red Riding Hood is just one story of this community that was plagued by werewolves.
Yeah. Basically, yes. These poor people. Well, they do live in the woods, I suppose, in the ancient woods at that. Before we move on from talking about the production design, I just want to say, just to be clear, and I think you're saying it too, the production design is gorgeous.
Yeah.
It is absolutely unreal. I was blown away because I'm just so used, especially these movies that I saw on the horror shelves, right, as a kid and never got to. And then I get to them and they're usually pretty disappointing, or at least they're usually pretty cheap. I was shocked at how gorgeous the sets were in this movie. They fully had me in this world. They were unreal. They were beautiful. And the production designer got a lot of attention for his work in this. His name is Anton Furst. He's no longer with us, but he did he did special effects for Alien before this.
Oh.
And then he ended up doing a couple more movies. This movie got him an attention from Stanley Kubrick, who hired him on to do Full Metal Jacket. And later, he went on to do production design for Tim Burton's original Batman. He was the production designer for that. And that has a crazy style, right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
This guy is super talented. And to hear him talk, he said, we had such a low budget for this movie that we had to make 12 trees look like a forest. And
they did. That's hard to believe.
It's
because
phenomenal.
It seems like this forest is massive, and it would be so easy to become lost in it. To find out that it was only 12 trees is insane.
It's really insane. It's otherworldly, this forest. It has vines, and it's your perfect fairy tale forest. And like you said, the village that they're in is this perfect fairy tale village from all the illustrations in your fairy tale books. It's small, right? And I think that's what makes it look a little stagey. It's like 6 buildings around a little well in the middle of the woods, and that's it. Which is kind of suitable, because then you can believe that in the future, all this went away, but that well is still there, and it's right down the street from where this house is. It's really great. I just wanted to call attention to this guy and the great job he did on the production design, because it really helped with the story. Oh,
I agree. I mean, it sets the tone perfectly. It's dark and creepy. I like it a lot. So Alice is apparently killed by this pack of wolves, and then there's a funeral, and Rosaleen goes home with her grandmother because her mother is mourning and in no condition to look after her or whatever. So she walks through the woods with Granny.
Don't stray from the path, girl. Did you not hear what I told you? Once you stray from the path, you're lost entirely. The wild beasts know no mercy. They wait for us in the wood, in the shadow. And once you put a foot wrong, they pounce. There now. Don't take on so. It's something you have to learn, otherwise you'll end up like your poor dear sister.
Angela Lansbury, she was handpicked for this role because the director was impressed with her performance in The Manchurian Candidate. He said that she had kind of this sly, cunning charm that made her perfect for this. And I agree. She's not sweet little Mrs. Potts in this movie. She's got an edge to her.
She almost feels a little sinister at times, doesn't she?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was really, really great
She's
performance.
good.
Yeah.
She's very good.
A wolf may be more than he seems. He may come in many disguises.
What's that?
The wolf that ate your sister was hairy on the outside. But when she died, she went straight to heaven. The worst kind of wolves are hairy on the inside. And when they bite you, they drag you with them to hell.
Don't trust men. Right.
And she gives her this advice. She's like, you're young. You've got things to learn. This girl, Rosaleen, is supposed to be almost 13. She's not even 13. She's only 12. She looks older.
She does.
If I hadn't known from reading about it that she was meant to be just shy of 13, I would have guessed 16, 17, maybe.
Huh, she's 12. The actress is 12. It's crazy.
The actress is 12. And there's no mention of her age in the movie, but there is a trailer in which there's a scene where she says how I think it's this scene when the grandmother says, "You're young, you have a lot to learn." She says something like, "Well, I'm 12 3/4" or something like that. I don't know. But she says, "You got a lot to learn. There are 3 lessons. Never stray from the path, never eat a windfall apple, and never trust a man whose eyebrows meet." And I love that a unibrow is the definitive characteristic of werewolves. And every werewolf in this movie has a unibrow.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's weird. I guess it's kind of rare enough that you might as well make it a thing. I also like that because, it's always cool when a movie does some foreshadowing and lets you in on how you can spot the quote-unquote bad guys, right? So that whenever somebody comes on the scene with the unibrow, it instantly ups the tension. You're like, oh, this guy's scary. That's when she's knitting her red shawl, and she starts her first story. She tells her a story about a wolf. It's presented as a flashback. It's this woman's wedding night, and she has married a traveling man. So obviously someone from outside of the town. They've just finished their wedding celebration. He brings her home. He's very taken by her. He's kind of looking her very lasciviously. I don't want to say lovingly because it doesn't really feel that way. He's eyeing his own wife here. She's so taken aback by it that she says, "Don't they have girls where you come from?" And he says, "Not like you." And there's a porcupine there that's kind of running around, and he tosses that porcupine.
It's a hedgehog. It wasn't a porcupine.
Was it a hedgehog? I don't know. I don't have whatever. Porcupine hedgehog. They both hurt when you pick them up. Anyway, he runs to the door and tosses it out. And as soon as he tosses it out, you start to hear these wolf howls, and you see that it's a full moon. He turns back to look at her and says, "I need to go out for a moment." A call of nature, which was a funny double entendre. But when he looks back at her, you can see that his eyes have changed. They're yellowish. I thought it was really effective. It's really, really creepy, but just natural. And I mean, it's not natural, but it's not like, he started sprouting fangs or anything, right?
Right.
So that he's still human and can act human. It's really creepy. So she gets in bed. She's extremely happy. She's waiting for him. And he's gone. And when she wakes up, there are just lots of wolves outside howling. And her thought is, oh, my God, it can't be. She thinks he's been carried off. by wolves while he was peeing. And so she calls the townspeople in. And by the way, I can't get over how many animals there are in the background scenery. There are
lots.
There are goose and, like you said, frogs and things in almost every scene outdoors, just like wandering around in the front.
Lots of birds. Yeah. Chickens, turkeys, all kinds of things.
And anyway, people are saying to her, well, he's gone. Did they find something? I can't remember. I don't remember. What happened?
No, I mean, she found, like, wolf paw prints. Yeah. But that's it. No trace of him. But he never came back. It was funny to me that he went out to Pete fully nude.
Yeah.
they were in town.
Hey, it was a different time, Craig.
I guess. But he never comes back, and years go by. And Grandma says, but she was young and had a charming personality, so she remarried and she had kids.
She found another husband who wasn't too shy to piss in a pot.
Yeah.
I love that line.
That was funny. And just to hear Angela Lansbury say it, I have a feeling, we look at Angela Lansbury, she's this older woman, she's very distinguished. I have a feeling that she was probably a fun old dame. Like she hung out with gay dudes. I have a feeling this lady had a good sense of humor and knew how to have a good time.
Oh, yeah.
But it's fun to see her in something like this where she has the opportunity to be a little bit more gruff and a little bit crass at times, too. It's fun.
It is cool, yeah. Especially when all you've been seeing is mostly of her on the TV screen playing this cute lady in a very PG TV show. Yeah.
Right.
It's funny because not only does she have babies, she just seems angry and miserable. So anyway, yeah, she's home and she's angry and she's miserable. She's got these kids and it's like she's got one kid in her arm and then you hear her crying and she's like, what the hell do you want? And turns around and then there's another baby there. She grabs that baby. She walks over to the table. You realize there's a third baby. I thought this was just going to be a running gag where this woman has 12 kids and we're just going to see a new one introduced every time the scene changes. But yeah, it's very clear that she's a stay-at-home mom and she's not happy about it. Far from the romantic image that we had from her years before. There's a knock at the door, and she opens it, and it's her ex-husband after all these years, and he's quite shaggy. He comes in, he's angry, starts calling her a whore. Where did these kids come from? Who are you with? And then we get our first really major horror element. He starts peeling the skin off his face. It's very gory, very awesome version, I think, of a werewolf transformation. For practical effects, I think it's pretty good. And it's unique. It's not as good as Rick Baker's transformation in, American Werewolf in London, but it's a different style of transformation. It's like the wolf is literally inside of him and is breaking itself out. He peels off his skin, off his face with his hand down to muscle layer, and then you see the snout kind of shoot out from there, and you see the rest of his body, his back, almost steps out of his skin, really.
Yeah, he's all just tendon and muscle and raw.
It's so gross.
It's gross,
but it's great.
Yeah, it looks really good. It's a little strange because I was gonna say that it's not consistent with the transformations of the rest of the time. I guess it is really. Yeah. I think that the wolf kind of pops out of the human body rather than the human body transforming into.
Yeah.
But this is the only time that we see anybody ripping their flesh off.
Yeah.
Later we'll see their flesh split at the spine, or we'll see the wolf's snout come out through the human mouth. But this is by far the most gory and graphic transformation.
And I think it serves the themes of the story very well because Granny is constantly telling her you need to be careful of wolves, i.e. men, because it's like they're putting on a mask for you. They're going to be all sweet and nice to you until they have you, and then you're going to see their true nature, their hairiness on the inside. And so it's not like this is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation where this person is half good, half bad. I think what she's trying to say is these people are just putting on airs. They're wearing the skin of humans, but they're actually wolves in disguise.
Well, right. But Granny is basically saying, because the girl asks, she's like, all men? And Granny's like, wild animals, all of them. Yeah, all men.
She's bitter.
All men. They'll be nice to you until they get what they want, and then you'll see their true side. And she even asks, first of all, she kind of watches her parents have sex, which was weird.
But also common for the time.
I guess, but ew. And I say that, but it's not graphic. I mean,
No.
it seems like, it's not,
some grunting.
Yeah, I mean, they have their clothes, their night clothes on. It's more suggested than anything else. But it is certainly suggested because the next day she asks her mom,
Mummy,
Yes, pet.
does he hurt you?
Does who hurt me?
Does Daddy hurt you? When
No, not at all.
sounds like
What?
the beast Granny talked about.
it's weird. I don't know if we're reading too much into it. Like, is it supposed to be commentary on the relationship between men and women, the nature of men? I just can't tell if I'm supposed to take it that seriously or if it's just a stupid
Well,
movie.
actually, I think it's probably more of an exploration of what goes through an adolescent girl's head when she's learning about all these things for the first time. I think it's very clear, like she's sewing this red shawl for her. She's coming into her menstrual period. I think that's what we're all talking about here. Grandma's starting to tell her the truth about the real world. We all know, like, Into the Woods, the woods is a sort of metaphor at times for going through the difficulties of life or going through the hard changes of life and all the dangers that beset you. And so this is another part of it. It's like sex, like learning about sex. Like when you first learn about sex, sometimes it's like a horrifying, weird thing, and perhaps even more for women because in a male-female sex relationship, they're submissive. And so when she sees her dad grunting and, on top of her mom and her mom with her eyes closed and whatever, she's not sure what to make of it. And when you couple that with what Grandma said to her, it's natural for her to even think that the sex act itself might be this, it's creepy for her. And I can relate to that. When I first learned about sex, I was super confused about it and I wasn't sure what to make of it either. And it did seem a little sinister to me too, because, I grew up in the 80s and I remember everybody was talking about AIDS. And I just heard that you have sex that gives you AIDS. And so.
And you'll die.
Yeah. And so I thought sex leads to AIDS. That's how I first heard and thought about sex. So I needed a lot of correction there. I thought it was a bad thing. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what they were exploring here.
I'm sure you're right. The whole in Little Red Riding Hood and even Little Red Riding Hood Into the Woods, it's very much about sex and that kind of. In the original Broadway production of Into the Woods, the wolf has a prominent penis. like he doesn't wear pants and he has a prominent penis right there on display, and it's easy to see that in the original story as well. I don't know. It felt a little bit heavy-handed here, and I think I was maybe getting a little bit of male fragility. Like, hey,
we're not all not that bad.
We're not. Yeah. But
True.
That's probably just my insecurities. I should.
Well, it is heavy-handed. No, there's no question. I mean, you watch this movie and nothing else, and you just get the sense that all men are dangerous, really.
Well, not necessarily all men, because the dad is good.
True.
We didn't finish out that the other story. So eventually, this woman, her original husband, comes back out of nowhere. He's got all this long hair, and he's angry and basically calls her a whore for having children that aren't his. And that's when he transforms, and it looks like he's going to attack her, but her husband comes back and chops his head off. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chops his head off, and it flies into like the wash bucket or something, but when it floats back up, it's human.
Oh, and it's such a cool effect. Mm-hmm. It's slow motion. It happens so seamlessly. It's so this whole movie is so stylized, and that was a great shot.
Yeah. And then we cut back to, just Rosaleen's day-to-day life. She goes back home. And I was saying, not all the men in this movie are bad. Her dad is a good guy. Her dad is played by David, the waxwork guy.
David Warner.
Who was really, aside from Angela Lansbury, I think the only person that I recognize from this movie, except for the guy who plays the devil, Terrence Stamp.
Oh, yeah.
He makes just a cameo appearance, and I'm like, that's General Zod.
Yeah.
He's uncredited in the movie.
It's crazy. He's in everything.
But I looked it up.
Yeah.
He's cool. Anyway, so the dad's nice. There's this boy. Hardly anybody in this movie has names.
Yeah.
Except for Rosaleen and her sister. But there's this boy who's billed as Amorous Boy, who is seemingly about her age, maybe a little bit older, but he's obviously attempting to woo her.
I thought maybe you'd take a walk with me in the woods. On Sunday after the service. Just a little walk, Rosaleen.
Why should I?
I thought maybe you'd want to.
I'll have to ask.
But tell your mother I'll be with you. And we walked straight from the path.
And initially, their first encounter is very childish, and then as the movie goes on a little bit, it becomes a little bit more mature and flirtatious, and he's clearly interested in her. Eventually, she becomes interested in him, and he seems like a nice boy. Like, it seems like the story is setting you up, oh, this will eventually be the boy that she'll marry, and blah, 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 which would be fine, because he seems cute and nice, whatever. That's not the way that the story goes, but...
Yeah. No, it's not.
But he invites her for a walk in the woods after church, and she's like, I don't know, I'll have to ask my parents. And then we just get Granny's second story. It's not as clunky as I'm making it sound.
No.
It works. It's stories within a story within a story. And I just don't think that it needs that last outer layer. I would kind of have just preferred to live in this world and not have the outer world of the reality. But I guess I get what he was going for. It just didn't necessarily work for me. It's fine. It's not a huge complaint. But anyway,
yeah.
Grandma's second story.
Well, Grandma's second story is basically, they say the priest's bastards often turn into wolves, which I think is cute. I don't know if this was a different time or what, but, priests famously can't marry, but they might be having amorous relationships anyway. I just think this is funny. So anyway, he says, the priest's bastards often turn into woods if they're born like feet first, and of course their eyebrows meet. And then one day they'll meet the devil in the wood. And this boy, again, we're back in this period time, even earlier than Granny, and this boy's wandering through the woods, and this Rolls Royce pulls up.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And there's a guy in the back, and he's the devil.
Well, and the chauffeur is Rosaleen in a blonde wig.
Oh, you're right. I wondered about that. I wondered if I was just seeing things.
No, it was for sure her.
Okay. All right, fair enough. That's weird. I don't know what to make of that either. So anyway, there's a man in the back, and he's holding an infant skull, which I read in the trivia that it was an actual pygmy skull that they acquired for the movie, which is creepy. And he's got a little potion, and he gives it to the boy and says, use it wisely, waste not, want not. And the boy seems to know what to do, like he's made this deal with the devil or something, and he rubs it on his chest, and he starts growing hair on his chest. And in true Evil Dead fashion, the vines of the forest start to crawl up his legs. And I guess that's the forest claiming him as a creature.
I don't know. I didn't know what to make of it, because he screams as if in agony, and his face is all contorted. But that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
Then it cuts to real-life, present-day Rosaleen writhing around in her bed, and the image of that boy with his face all contorted is in her mirror.
Yeah.
I really didn't know what to make of that story.
I didn't know if it was an adolescence thing. Like, the boy comes to adolescence and, goes through all these changes, which can be horrifying and do involve, growing hair and whatnot. And then, there's a temptation element in it where then they're sort of like smitten by the devil with this lust, if you will, for women, which they can use wisely or use in bad ways. I don't know. That's my feminist interpretation of it.
Fair enough.
But it's funny. She says you can't trust any. Well, she says the girl's Rosaleen back with her grandmother says that's a horrid story. I didn't like it at all. And grandmother says you can't trust anyone, a priest least of all. He isn't called father for nothing. What's with these lines?
I know. I didn't get it.
He's claiming to be pure and chaste,
sure.
but actually he's out having sex and fathering children, I think is what she's saying.
I guess.
But yeah, at this point, grandmother has finished the red shawl, and she puts it on this girl, and it's a striking contrast with the rest of the scenery, which is pretty drab and gray. And this is when now she's ready to meet the boy and go out on this initial experimentation with him out in the woods by herself, which is interesting the way that the men in her family and around her approach this. Her mom is full of, be careful, it's dangerous, don't stray from the path, be careful what he might do. And her dad is almost like, yeah, it's cool, less concerned, really.
Yeah, boys will be boys.
The boy's dad, as they're running off, shouts after him, that's my boy! As the grandma shouts out after him, be careful, don't stray from the path. It's really an interesting contrast brought to light there of the way that even these adult men and women treat their kids when they're going through this period, I think.
Yeah. So they walk, and he immediately kind of puts the move on her. It's not aggressive in a bad way. I mean, he seems sweet, and he seems smitten with her, and he wants to kiss her, and she runs away initially, but eventually he kind of teases her and says, "What, are you scared?" And she's like, "No, I'm not scared." So they kiss, and she runs, and he chases, and then she climbs a tree, and he passes underneath it but doesn't see her. And then she finds like a heron's nest, some big bird up in the tree, and in the nest, the heron flies off, and there's this big wide shot of her, this little tiny red figure up in this super tall tree against like a matte painting. It looks totally fake, but it's still kind of cool looking. Mm-hmm. She finds in this nest a looking glass and 3 eggs, and then the eggs hatch, and they have ceramic baby Jesuses in them.
Yes.
What?
Baby dolls. I don't know, but were they Jesus? I thought they were just dolls.
I don't know. I mean, they looked like a baby Jesus from a manger scene.
Yeah, they did.
But they could have just as easily just been any generic infant.
True. It's weird. It gets very surreal. I mean, there's no...
right. Because then the boy finds a slaughtered cow with its calf, like, hanging around near the corpse, which I thought was sad and gross. And then Rosaleen, on her way back into town, walks right past a wolf, and the boy comes back without her, and a fight breaks out because they think that he's done something to her, but then she shows back up, and she shows her mom the ceramic baby, and it sheds a tear?
Yeah.
Like, what?
I honestly, at first I thought, are they trying to say she's pregnant now or something? I wasn't sure what to make of that either. I'm still not sure what to make of that. But
I'm not either.
I mean, there's no question that as the director and production designer both said that Salvador Dali was one of their inspirations for the design of this movie. There's a lot of surrealism.
And I can see it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure.
And so the men of the town set up a hunt, and they set a trap for the wolf, and they dig a pit, and then they put a duck on top of it as bait, and this was one of the times they used a real wolf, and the wolf approached the duck, but the duck quacked at it, and it got scared and ran away, so they had to reshoot it the next day with a different wolf. I thought that was hilarious that the duck scared the wolf away.
Right.
But in the movie, they actually do capture the wolf, and they kill it, and the dad cuts off a paw, I guess, as a souvenir. I don't know. Yeah. But then the paw turns into a human hand. And the rest of the body turned back human too. So he throws the hand in the fire. While the men are out hunting, Rosaleen and her mom are just hanging out at home, and Rosaleen's like, "Well, I'll tell you a story." And that's when she tells this weird aristocratic story.
Yeah. This was the most bizarre, I think, of them all, honestly.
I feel like I've seen this or something like it before. I feel like I've seen another werewolf movie in this time period where it's like English powdered-faced, powdered wig aristocrats turning into werewolves. I don't know. Maybe it's this. Maybe I've seen this.
Yeah.
Anyway, tell them what happened.
Well, they're just at this wedding banquet that's in a tent on the grounds, as I said earlier, of the actual house that Rosaleen is sleeping in, but obviously in previous time. And they're all chatting and eating, and the wedding couple is there. And a woman comes walking in from outside, and she's not as noble as they are, I suppose. She looks haggard, and she's young, and she's pregnant. And she parades in front of them and grabs an apple and spits it out at the groom and starts lecturing them and basically says, "So I wasn't good enough for you? I was, once upon a time, don't you remember? Even the wolves in the forest are more decent." And her anger is so fierce, she cracks a mirror just by looking at it. And it seems to cast a spell over everyone, or maybe it just causes them to transform into their true selves. I'm not sure. But everyone starts transforming into wolves, while none of the waitstaff seems surprised at all.
No, they actually seem pleased.
Yeah. And
like these people are such jerks, they're getting what is coming to them.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then when everyone leaves, they pop corks and toast to it. So, and the same woman is seen rocking a baby high in a tree, which was cute. Another nursery rhyme nod, I suppose.
Well, Yeah, and it said that she forced the wolves then to serenade her every night or something like that. But yeah, it's a woman scorned, exacting her revenge. I actually really liked this scene. I thought the transformation was great, and I loved seeing those dogs jump over the table in clothes. Some of them like jumping out of the clothes, some of them still in the clothes, and just causing havoc at that fancy dinner party.
It's shot so well.
It looks really good.
Yeah, it really does look good.
That leads us then, finally, it gets us to the Little Red Riding Hood story. Oh, yeah, but then there's there's the Little Red Riding Hood story, and then there's a story within that one, too. Yeah. But this gets us to the story of Little Red Riding Hood. We know what's going to happen. She packs up a bag of goodies for Grandma. She's going into the woods alone. Mom warns her not to stray off the path. Her little amorous boy offers to go with her and protect her, but she assures him that she can take care of herself. And she goes out into the woods, and she immediately bumps into what looks like a handsome aristocrat, very well dressed, seemingly wealthy.
Seemingly from that story we just talked about, honestly. I think there's a bit of a nod to that.
Maybe.
That class of people or something, yeah.
But he's got a unibrow.
Yeah.
So she should know better, and maybe she does. I think that that's kind of what the movie is suggesting, is I think that she kind of knows that he's a wolf. But again, it's about burgeoning sexuality and curiosity, and she is curious. And so he says, let's go have a picnic. And so they do, and he's very flirtatious, and she's very flirtatious back. I think she basically outright tells him that she's attracted to him.
Yeah.
And says that all of the boys in the village are so common or something like that. And she's enamored with him, and they are very flirtatious. He shows her he has a compass, and then he grabs her and throws her to the ground in a playful but physically aggressive way. If she were not into it, it might be a little much, she could feel threatened, but she is into it.
Yeah.
And they're playful down there. He's kind of on top of her a little bit. He says, let's have a wager. I bet I can beat you to Granny's house. And she says, can I have the compass if I win? And he says, yeah. And she says, well, what if I lose? And does he say that she has to give him a kiss?
Yep, that's right. And until then, he gives her his hat as a token of his goodwill until they meet again.
So they go, they part ways, and he does arrive at Granny's house first. And he knocks on the door, and she says, who is it? And he says, a friend. And she said, okay, well, come on in then. And he comes in, and she immediately knows that he's a werewolf. And so they have a short fight, and then he knocks her head off.
Well, she says to him, what have you done with my daughter? And he says, nothing she didn't want, which is pretty true, actually. Yeah. And then, they have this long fight, like you said, and he burns her.
It's not really long. It doesn't go on very long.
She burns his hand with a poker.
Yeah, she burns his hand with a poker. And, she does put up a fight, but eventually he just with his hand, knocks her head off, and it shatters against the fireplace as though it had been made of ceramic or porcelain or something. And there's never a mention of that again. Like,
right.
Okay, was she? I don't get it, but whatever. She's gone now. And Rosaleen arrives, and she comes in, and he's not fully wolfed out. I feel like he has the wolf eyes at this point. Yeah. And she does the, what big eyes you have, the better to see you with. And it's playful and it's seductive. And eventually he takes off his shirt, I think. And she's like, what big arms you have. And he's like, the better to hug you with. And then eventually he says, what big teeth you have. And he says, the better to eat you with, in a very, like you said, lascivious, seductive kind of way. It's definitely innuendo there.
It's interesting too, because I expect her to be afraid, but she doesn't come across as afraid. She comes across as cautious. But like you said, she's still, even though he killed her granny, I guess we forget about that for a moment. I mean, she knows it's happened because she sees Granny's hair in the fire, and she says, your kind can't stomach hair, can you? Even if the wolf worst wolves are hairy on the inside. And he takes off her shawl, and he tells her...
And makes her burn it. I thought that was pretty symbolic. You know, we're leaving childhood behind, young lady.
Yeah, right. And he asks her, aren't you afraid? And she just says, it wouldn't do me much good to be afraid, now would it?
Uh-huh.
And there's a little bit of byplay, but eventually she goes to the window and she seems sympathetic toward the wolves that are howling outside. She says something like, "Oh, those poor creatures."
They almost kiss at some point before she goes to the window. They come very close to kissing. And in the original script, they did kiss, but because this actress was only 12, they didn't think that would be appropriate. Thank God.
Yeah, right.
But that said, it's still very seductive and sexy. Being that she is 12, burgeoning on inappropriate, because it is very seductive. And you see this done with vampires all the time. There's always the seductive nature of vampires.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen it done with werewolves,
No.
but it plays out very much the same way. And it makes sense. There's something sexy and erotic about danger.
Well,
I don't know.
Even as a half-wolfed out guy, he's a pretty good-looking guy. I mean...
Right.
This is a sexy scene, but there's twice she tries to kill him. I mean, she whips out her knife, a knife at one point, which he knocks out, and as she turns away from the window, she's got a gun out, and it's trained on him. And she asks him, "Are you only a man when you dress like one, like Granny says?" He kind of pushes the gun aside and mentions to her, we did have this bet. And she's like, "Well, perhaps you did win your bet. You are a gentleman. But they say the Prince of Darkness is a fine gentleman." But anyway, he ends up transforming after...
Well, she shoots him.
She shoots him, yeah.
They almost kiss. They come very close, but then she shoots him in the arm, and that's when he transforms. And this is where you get the wolf snout coming out of his mouth, and his spine bursts, and so his back along the spine bursts, and then he's a wolf, and she apologizes to him, and she goes over to him, and he's just sitting there whimpering because he's wounded, and she pets him and comforts him.
Yeah.
Which was I didn't see that coming at all. And then she tells him a story which is really brief, but it's about a she-wolf that came out of the underworld up into their village. It said she didn't mean anybody any harm, but somebody meant her harm, and somebody shoots her. And so she takes, shelter in the cemetery right outside the church, and the minister or priest comes out, and she turns into a mute, wild woman. But the priest takes pity on her, and then she runs naked through the forest back to the village, and returns to the world below through the well. It's a strange story, and it's the first time we get a female werewolf, and I think that there was supposed to be, the female werewolf meant no one any harm, but was wounded by a man anyway. I mean, there's got to be something there. It's really brief, and she just tells it to comfort him. When she's done with her story and we come back to them, the townspeople are approaching the cabin. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. They're looking for Rosaleen, and a wolf leaps out of the window, which startles the mother, and when she enters, she sees another wolf inside, but this wolf has Rosaleen's cross around its neck, and her husband bursts in to shoot it, and she says, no, don't shoot it, and just, knocks the gun away just in time, screams out the window for nobody to shoot this wolf, as it too leaps out the window and runs off, I think presumably to join the other wolf in the woods.
Yeah. I think she's going to join their pack.
And at this point, there's a whole pack. It's running fast through the woods, back first, past the toys. And then, like you said, it jumps into modern day, sort of. It comes into the big mansion, but it's covered in leaves and cobwebs, not like we saw it, earlier in the framing story.
It's like the worlds collide.
Yeah.
The fantasy of the forest is now infesting the house.
Mm-hmm. And the wolves come crashing into her room where she's sleeping into the window, and she wakes up screaming, and the dolls and glass crash to the floor. I think what this means is basically her childhood is gone, her childhood is destroyed, and she's kind of come into this era of womanhood, I suppose, which is complicated. And, the more we talk about it, the more I sort of feel like the story here is that these women well-equipped this girl for what she had to face. Like, she ended up knowing the dangers that she would have to face, and she did a pretty good job of doing it. And she has her own agency to say, I can deal with this, or I cannot let it get the best of me. I go back to this line that we didn't talk about earlier, but I think it's really important. When you said Rosalind asks her mom about her father and asks if her father ever hurts her, and she says no, she compares his grunting to the beast, that her grandmother was warning her about. And her mother says to her, if there's a beast in men, it meets its match in women too. Which is a very empowering statement. And her grandmother has been empowering her, throughout this by telling these stories and giving her knowledge. And her earlier experience with the boy kind of empowers her so that by the time she meets this danger, she's ready for it and she kind of wants it. But she's also able to take control and make decisions for herself and not let the wolf get the better of her.
Well, I just think that it's cool that in the end she embraces her carnal nature.
Exactly.
She doesn't fear it; she embraces it.
And maybe that's what the last little story about the wolf girl is all about. It's trying to tell us maybe that it's not just men. We're not talking about only men have this carnal nature, but women have it too. Girls have it too.
It's interesting. It's an interesting movie. I don't know. I was just kind of scratching my head throughout, like, who is this for? Like,
it's not for
because
kids. It's sure.
No, it's certainly not for kids, but it's not typical. It doesn't fit nicely into any box.
Commercial, yeah.
Right.
Which is why I liked it so much.
Well, it's definitely unique and original, and well made. And some good performances. Really, the star of the show is the young woman who plays Rosaleen. Her name is Sarah Patterson. And again, they were initially planning to cast somebody older, but the director was so enamored with this young woman. And she does a good job, and she's very beautiful.
She does. And apparently she was getting offers after this. She did one other movie and then just decided she didn't want to act. Nobody really knows why she decided, but she just got a family and kids and was like, no, I'm done. So that's
good for
interesting.
her.
Yeah, she was in a Canon movie Tales Snow White in 1987, which I went and looked that up, and it looked kind of interesting, actually.
I always like David Warner.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't have a whole lot to do in this movie, but he just has a presence about him that I really enjoy. I was going to say also, I read somewhere that the sets were very reminiscent of the Hammer films, and I hadn't really thought about that, but they very much are. They've got kind of that old Hollywood horror feel to them, which is charming, and I appreciated that. But, we're here mostly to talk about Angela Lansbury, and she was really fun in this movie. She was fascinated from the time she was a little girl with cinema and television, and during difficult times in her life, like when they initially had to move to America to, escape the Blitz that was going on in London. That was a time of struggle for her family, and she threw herself into movies. She would go to the movies as often as she could, and she comforted herself by trying to create characters or imitate characters that she would see in the movies. And I think that she's just one of those people that it was just within her, acting, performing were just within her nature. At the same time, she was very down to earth. She was married more than once, had a family, was very focused on her family. In fact, in the 70s, her kids, who were young adults at that time, got into counterculture and started using mind-altering drugs. And her daughter got involved with the Manson family.
That's crazy.
And that troubled her so much that she uprooted her entire family and her career and moved them all to Ireland, which...
Thank God she did.
Because her children were fine. Her son battled addiction, but got himself clean, and the daughter, cut ties. Thank God, with those people, and she almost certainly saved their lives. And she just liked, she liked housekeeping. She found pleasure in some of just the simple things in life. And she was a gay icon, and she was liberal, and was very vocal in her support of gay rights and the gay community, which is always appreciated by that community. And she just seemed like a very cool, talented, humble, gracious lady, and a bright star. Again, she just was one of those people that brings a smile to your face. She's just like, I'm getting really heavy-handed with it, but honestly, like, she's just like a ray of sunshine in what can sometimes be a dark and ugly world sometimes.
Mm-hmm. You think of like Betty White, very similar.
Right.
We said similar things about her. Nobody didn't like her, and every time you see her pop up somewhere, you just felt warm and fuzzy.
Right.
She just had that about her and the characters that she played. So, and seemed to have followed that through in real life as well. It just amazing. And it's great to have people like that we can look up to.
Agreed.
And sad that they're gone. Well, thank you so much for listening to our tribute episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. You can find us online anywhere you find podcasts. Just search for Two Guys and a Chainsaw Podcast. Also, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We have a Patreon page at patreon.com/chainsaw podcast. You get a lot of regular goodies from us there, as well as the unedited versions of our phone calls. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.